this is a night I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Mike Tollin is an incredibly famous producer, producing things in the sports world, and it is a sick Philadelphia sports fan. And so this is not a labor of love for Mike, but a call for duty. Most famously, recently, Mike produced Last Dance, which if you haven't had the opportunity to watch all 10 hours of that show, you're denying yourself really one of the great documentaries about sports and life. He produced one of the most interesting documentaries about the USFL, which brings us together with Jeff. I had the opportunity to be an outside lawyer for the USFL while Mike was a videographer, and Jeff has written a bestseller about the USFL. So we start on that common ground. Jeff's here tonight to talk about Three Ring Circus, which I've read and adore. I'm going to give you a little pitch here, Jeff. The book is a history, of course, of the great era of Shaq and Kobe and Phil Jackson. And what it is a deeply reported, well-written, humorous, engaging inside story of an organization, of individuals who are, for a time, the best in the world at what they do. And it teaches you an awful lot about character and what it takes to be successful and what kinds of personal problems the success creates around those. It's a book which is worth a careful read, but because it's filled with so many funny things, witty lines, hysterical anecdotes, you might be tempted to not see how deep this book can go. So I am really excited about it. I'm urging folks to buy it and read it. And I'm particularly excited to hear a 76ers fan cross-examine somebody about the Los Angeles Lakers. So I'll stand back and let Mike and Jeff go at it. Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks, Bert. Yeah, I formerly thought Jeff was a man of impeccable taste, but now he's written not one, but two Lakers. You know, you grow up with certain teams, you know, as Bert has already revealed, Philly fan. My second favorite team would always be, you know, when I was growing up, whoever was playing the Celtics. And then it became who was ever playing the Lakers. And on the day when Doc Rivers, having failed me as a kind of part-time Clippers fan, has now gone to my Sixers, here we are. It's just sort of perfectly appropriate, right in the middle of another steady march to a parade. But it's a testament to how warmly I feel about Bert and Jeff that we're here on this steamy Thursday night. I'm going to sell some books for you, Jeff, because I'm a big fan. Full disclosure, Jeff and I go back a bit, and as Bert said, we bonded over the USFL book, which was his last book, which was called Football for a Buck. You have great titles. Do you make up all the titles for your books?
I actually did a Twitter contest for this one because I was really stuck. And some guy in Iowa was like, you should call it Football for a Buck. And I was like, that's great. I swear, as soon as he said it, I was like, that's great. And I put his name in the acknowledgments and sent him a free book. So
nice. Okay. So then we go back after, before Football for a Buck, there was Showtime, Gunslinger, Sweetness, Bad Guys Won. Boys Will Be Boys, The Rocket That Fell to Earth, Love Me, Hate Me. Who else but Barry Bonds? What are your, people ask me all the time, so you're going to get subjected to a lot of the same nonsense I have to deal with. Give me your top three favorite books if you had to take them with you to a desert island.
Books that I've written or books in the world?
Books that you've written. Who cares about the
I guess I'll go this one, Sweetness and Football for a Buck about the USFL.
Great. I'll take it, man. I'll take third. And you've written two Laker books, man. So like, how do you choose your books and why did you go back to the well?
Wait, I just have to say one thing because I feel like it's important. The first time I ever talked to Mike was I had a book called it's like the best story ever though. I had a book called The Bad Guys Won. And some guy whose name I don't even remember anymore, you probably don't either, approached me about pitching it as a treatment, a film treatment. And somehow he got a phone meeting with Mike. And I didn't know anything about anything, but I looked up Mike's resume and I'm like, oh, this is a really big meeting. And this guy, he's like, can you be on the phone when we do the pitch? So it's me, Mike, and this guy. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I didn't know anything. And he goes, the pitch begins. Mike's like, all right, let me know what you got. And the guy goes, okay, there's a boy in a room. He's 12 years old. His name is Jeff. I actually remember I was in a coffee shop in New York City going like this. And as soon as the pitch ended, I called you because your number was listed as one of 3 numbers. And I was like, I am so sorry. I did not know that was going to happen. And you were very nice about it. So that was really funny.
So I didn't say out loud, that was the worst pitch I'd ever gotten. I was sure thinking it. But let's finish the story, Jeff. So this was a guy pitching a dramatic treatment of Bad Guys Won, which was the crazy story of the '86 Mets who won the championship that year. All kinds of bad behavior being rewarded, as it often is. And I said, bad pitch to turn this into a drama, which I think once again is sort of happening, right? Percolating a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I said, great idea for a doc. To make a long story just a little bit longer, we got Ron Darling attached. We walked into the office of David Nevins, who runs Showtime. We basically sold it in the room with RJ Cutler to direct. All he said was, get me Doc and Daryl. We went 0 for 2, got neither. And that was the end of the project. But Showtime is now an HBO series. Tell me about how that happened.
That I got really lucky. It's actually weird. Like a writer named Jim Hecht came to my house years ago when I was living in New Rochelle. And at the time, Jim's biggest credit, not kidding, was Ice Age 2, Dawn of the Ice Age. He wrote the animated, and he came to my house and he's like, I love the Lakers. I love this book. And we were like, okay, he didn't have any money to offer. He was just like, I love this book, but nothing was going on. He's like, I really think something can happen. And he kept talking about it, but nothing happened. One day he's like, Adam McKay is interested in this. So I go home and I Google Adam McKay because I had no idea who he is. Kind of a big deal. And then we're at Adam McKay's house, and all of a sudden I'm getting papers from HBO, and they're really interested in this. And then last October, my wife and I are on the studio having cameos in the pilot for this series and it's going to be, it's going to be a series, a dramatic series based on the 80s Lakers, based on my book. So
I know Jim Hecht, and I also had a girlfriend at the time who was working on the show with him. And so I'm rooting for you from the bleachers. I want to ask you about your relationship to that experience, because I've seen it in the middle of it. And I've seen authors just go, this is a miracle and whatever happens is great, and invite me to the premiere. And others who say, this is my baby and I need to hang on to every last word and I want to, approvals of everything. Where are you on that spectrum?
If the first guy you said is a 1 and the last guy you said is a 10, I'm like a 2. Like, perfect. To me, I wrote the book. What you do with it is what you do with it. And I do not expect a strict interpretation. I don't expect anything. They've been really nice. They've called me a lot when they have questions about, what about this game? Or do you know how to get in touch with this person? Or do you think this is accurate? Is there more backstory? They gave my wife, myself, and my kids a cameo on the pilot, which is just joyful. There was a moment on set when Adam McKay stopped everything and said, everyone, this is Jeff Pearlman. This does not happen if he wasn't here. I mean, it was one of the nicest, truly one of the nicest moments of my life.
I was going to say, and you hit the lottery to have Adam and HBO and all the resources and all the goodwill there. I hope it turns out great. I don't see why it would.
Yeah, me too. So they've been great.
Have you gotten offers yet for Three Ring Circus?
So HBO is actually optioning it in case they make a sequel off, in case this does well, and go on with a sequel of, do it because the Showtime series, I'm not sure how many seasons they're thinking. If it's going to be 79, 80, then 80, 81, or how many seasons. But there's this idea theoretically. Well, then we go to the Shaq Kobe years, kind of jump forward. So.
Is that why Lucy Stilla called me, and did I already blow that opportunity by not?
I don't actually know. I didn't know she called you.
She did call me a while ago. Tell her to call me back. We
all right.
This.
I'll tell her.
So why did you go back to the well, Laker well?
A bunch of reasons. Number one, I just think Shaq. You don't get 3 iconic sports figures in one room that often. Like you're doing Walter Payton. There's Walter Payton. You do Brett Favre. There's Brett Favre. But here it's this era with, you know, three truly iconic basketball figures, Shaq, Kobe, Phil, all kind of big enough to sell a book or carry a book on their own. And they're all in this together. Number two, the Laker organization just has always been really good for me to work with. They were a little tougher this time, but Jeannie Buss has always been the owner of the Lakers, has been nothing but nice to me and helpful. And when Showtime came out, this is where, number one, when I interviewed Jeannie, she just showed up at a restaurant. She's the owner of the Lakers. She showed up just by herself at a restaurant. Later on, I used to teach adjunct at Chapman University in Orange. And I asked her just one time, any chance, oh, you came too. I said, any chance you come to my class? And she's like, same with you, actually. Like, people are nice. Like, that's the thing. Like, people are just generally nice. Like, I asked you, I'm like, would you come to my class? Sure. I asked Jeannie, would you come to my class? Sure. She drives down, she's running across campus, and people are like, this is the owner of the Lakers? Like, this is the owner of the Lakers? And just, they're just decent, you know? And I just thought the story was good. The organization's big. It was just worth going for it. So,
Yeah. Jeannie's great. It's a little bit of a challenge to my, loathing of the Lakers, is knowing what a great woman. Okay, speaking of loathing, I think somewhere, Book Jacket or some press or something, either you said or the publicist said, 8 years of two superstars loathing each other with warfare, infighting, and hostility. Accurate?
there was a lot of loathing. There was a lot of, I would say yes, actually. I know you're thinking no. I would actually say yes. I would say, you know, Kobe showed up in 96. He was drafted in 96 by Charlotte, traded to the Lakers. And he shows up, and his first meeting with the Lakers is a training camp in Hawaii in 96. And they're all in a circle. All the players are in a circle. And one by one, hey, I'm Nick Van Exel. It's my third year here. Hey, I'm Eddie Jones. Hey, I'm Shaq. Yo, I'm Kobe Bryant, Lower Merion High School. Nobody here is going to punk me. That was his introduction to the Lakers. Nobody here is going to punk me. He's barely 18 years old, right? That does not go over well. And Shaq early on gives him the nickname Showboat, you know, and it's not a compliment, because all the guy wants to do is this and underhand and drive to the hoop. And if you watch his summer league games, he played on the Lakers summer league team in 96. I always say those are all young players trying to get an invite to training camp and young rookies. There was never a worse player to have as a teammate in the summer league than Kobe Bryant, because you're fighting to catch someone's eye. And if you're a point guard, you pass him, you are never getting it back. If you're a shooting guard, you are never getting it back. If you were the center, he is not dropping a low to you. And that drove those guys crazy. And he came in and he was very self-assured / arrogant. And Del Harris was the first coach. And Del Harris thought he needed to be very protective of Kobe. He didn't think he was ready to play. And Kobe hated that. And Kobe said to Del one time, he's like, I don't understand why you don't give me more post-up plays down low. I could post up. And Del Harris is like, yeah, because we have Shaq. Like, we have this guy Shaq, so we actually don't need you to post up. He was not one who was looking for mentors. When he got married in Dana Point to his wife. He invited no Laker players. Most of them didn't know he was getting married. Many of them didn't know he had a girlfriend. There were moments, one time Shaq takes the entire team out to dinner on the road in Miami seafood restaurant. Kobe's like, no, I'm not going to go. He shows up a half hour later at the same restaurant with a book and a table for one. One of my favorite guys, J.R. Reed, briefly played for the Lakers. He was part of the Glenn Rice trade. Jerry West, the general manager, was like, I really like the way you deal with young players. Can you try taking Kobe under your wing? Sure. They're on a plane. Yo, Kobe, come on back. We're all playing cards. Nah, I'm good. Yo, Kobe, we're going out to dinner. Let's go. We're going for a steak. Let's go. Nah, I'm good. Kobe, you want to come to a movie? Nah, I'm good. Like, and he went back to Jerry West, and he's like, there's just nothing I can do here. Like, there's nothing I can do. He does not want it. He doesn't need it. And Shaq, I don't know if you dealt with Shaq a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Love him.
As good as it gets. Yeah. And all he wants is to give love and to receive love. And he wants you to want his affection, not in a selfish way. He just wants you. Like, he was the best at buying teammates suits, taking them out for dinner. My favorite thing is when Mark Madsen joins the Lakers. Mark Madsen is a Mormon, devout Mormon out of Stanford, went on his mission to Spain, and he joins the Lakers. And Shaq decides, I'm going to find this guy a Mormon wife. And whenever they're on the flight, and a flight attendant walks by, a new flight attendant's working the charter, Shaq would be like, hey, are you Mormon? No, why? Don't worry about it. They would be, they were on the Mark Madsen shows up at the Laker offices one time, And there's this woman there, and she's like, "You're Mark, right?" She's like, "Yes." She's like, "Shaquille O'Neal was at a restaurant I was at last night, and he actually came up to our table and asked if any of us were Mormon because he was trying to set you up." He was just like, he
Great.
just was so unique. And I really think it hurt his feelings, like actually hurt his feelings that Kobe had no interest in that. Like he wanted Kobe to want to be Robin and he would be Batman. You know, he wanted big brother, little brother. And Kobe just had no need for it. And I just think that really wounded him.
Yeah. Kobe came after his retirement to my office as he was transitioning to media mogul. Little did we know, Oscar winner before, you know, think of the people that have been, how long did it take Spielberg? How long did it take Scorsese? How long did it take Bryant?
Yeah.
By the way, can I just stop and say hi to David Schwartz, who's wearing a Philly hat right in the middle of my square.
Oh, there he is.
Thank you for being a kindred spirit and for suffering through this misery with me. So there's so many places so many rabbit holes you just led me to.
Wait, how was Kobe when he came to your office?
I mean, so he went to the rival high school. I went to Haverford High School. He went to Lower Merion. That was the Thanksgiving Day game. Somehow this kid growing up around the corner from me grew up as a Cowboys fan and a Laker fan. I hate to say this, but everything about him smacked to me and many Philadelphians as inauthentic. Yep. And he was my beloved expat. The lowest circulation of any Philadelphia magazine issue ever was the one he was on the cover of. But let's not go there because ultimately he was very gracious. I had some really warm conversations. He actually asked for some semblance of mentorship a little bit. I liked the people that worked with him. I knew how hard that was. There's that old thing of nothing's more minority than being a minority owner on a team that George Steinbrenner owned. So nothing's more. Take the parallel with Kobe, right, in personal life and private life. So you of course I was interested in the Jordan Kobe thing. You do a great job with it. I love the story about in his second year, because his rookie year he didn't really play much. But that game where it was the showdown and MJ was schooling him, but in the fourth quarter, can you tell the story about how Kobe was going to have his moment finally against MJ?
Wait, now I'm blanking. What actually refresh my?
Well, so it was like they were getting crushed. MJ had 36. Kobe ended up scoring 33. But there was a time in the fourth quarter where he gets the ball and he's going to do the signature Jordan move against Jordan. And everybody on his team is saying, what are you doing? Why are you just...
It's funny because that game really pissed the Lakers off because he's sitting there on the court asking Michael Jordan for advice. And it later became like this endearing thing, like, oh, remember? And they would show the video. I guess we're talking almost like we're pretending that the death isn't hanging over right now. You know, like we're just talking about Kobe and it's just Kobe. Like, here's the deal. Like he, it infuriated his teammates because he's sitting there on the court and this is the guy who he mimics and who he wants to be and blah, blah, blah. And he's sitting there asking for advice in the middle of a game, you know? And then like, you know, he wants to light him up desperately. And he actually would talk trash to Jordan every now and then. And he just wasn't really there, you know, like, and it's funny, this isn't where you were going, but I was just thinking like the thing Kobe suffered from a lot, especially early on, and teammates would drive them insane, is like if they were playing Jordan or they were playing Vince Carter or they were playing Allen Iverson or Stephon Marbury or Tracy McGrady, he had to go at them and he would forget what was going on otherwise, especially if they were playing Vince Carter. He knew, like the other players knew, like this is going to be a crappy night for us and we're going to have to rip the ball from his hands because they're always going to want to do is play this one-upsmanship thing. So for a long time, including that season, I mean, Del Harris didn't want to play him as much as he did that second year, but like he was kind of insufferable and there was a lot of pressure from the front, but he took it upon himself, had to go at him, had to be Jordan, had to just be the star. And it kind of led to a lot of really uncomfortable relations.
So we were fortunate enough to interview Kobe for the Last Dance. And I was kind of egging on the director to kind of, you know, challenge him about spending your whole life impersonating almost your hero. Didn't quite go there. It was actually very good-natured. Kobe was on his best behavior, was sort of, idolatrous. Finally, Jason Hare, the director, asked him, so like this one tiny little dig was, well, Michael won 6, you only won 5. And didn't take the bait at all. He said, look, I win no championships without Michael. I'm here because of Michael. I owe everything. He's a big brother to me. It's in the show. And I'm like, once again, I go to disingenuous, inauthentic. Okay, whatever, he said it. It's a good soundbite. Cut to the memorial service, which I'm sure you all remember, where MJ flew out on his own and bawled like a baby and talked about Kobe as his little brother. So, all of a sudden I had to like rewrite the history and say, wow, there was some authenticity to it. And ultimately, it feels like the two really did bond and really did have a mutual affection.
Well, I think the same thing. I mean, Shaq and Kobe, I'm working on this book and it's just Shaq, Kobe, like this, Shaq, Kobe. They don't get along and it's terrible. And they don't really talk anymore. And a lot of people, they did that TNT special where they sat down from each other, across from each other. And I was working on the book around when that was going on. A lot of guys were like, oh, that's BS. Like, there's no way Shaq can't stand him, blah, blah, blah. And then Kobe dies and you saw Shaq. I mean, Shaq was destroyed. And I've used this weird analogy. I'll give you a Philly analogy I use a lot. I grew up and still am a big Hall & Oates fan. I loved Daryl Hall and John Oates. Love.
Me too.
They can't stand each other. They don't like each other. They don't hang out together. When they're on the road, they literally fly in for a show, do the show, do a few like friendly glances just to give the audience what they want, and they leave, right? And that's it. That is it. They do not hang out together. I'm sure if Daryl Hall died tomorrow, John Oates would be devastated, and vice versa, because they have this shared history that goes back for so long. And I really think about, like, you don't think of Shaq without Kobe. You don't think of Kobe without Shaq. They're intertwined eternally. And I think when Kobe died, it's not that Shaq and he were best friends or even really friends, but they have this shared history and this connection that just lasts. And I think it just overwhelmed Shaq. And I think in a way with Jordan too, like Kobe was the next Jordan 1,000,000 times over. And he's the closest we've ever had to another Jordan. LeBron is nothing like Jordan. Kobe was actually a lot like Jordan.
There was a minute when people were sort of trying to make Kawhi into the next Jordan. Unfortunately, that demise against the Nuggets has taken that far from our heads. But the moment in the memorial, to go back to that, and again, watching Shaq, there was MJ balling, there was Shaquille balling. I wasn't surprised, just because, as we both said, Shaquille is so full of love, so full of humanity. Of course, they won 3 titles together. Of course, it's kind of like, you complete me. But there was one great moment. I don't know if you remember Shaq's. It was the funniest line of the night. And if there are any children out there, mothers, please hold their ears. So Shaq goes, I tried to tell Kobe there's no I in team. And he said, yeah, but there's a me, motherfucker. TEAM.
That was great.
Yeah. So let's talk about the third guy a little bit. We've talked a little bit about Del Harris. So in the 4 years, this, he went from 48 to 53 to 56 to 61 games. That's not slacker. That's a guy, as much as he didn't have any charisma and he was just sort of that guy, he looked like a professor, not a basketball coach, he was succeeding on some level. Mm-hmm. Do they ever win with Del Harris if they don't bring in Phil the next year?
All right, so I flew to Dallas to hang out with Del Harris. I got 2 for 1. I got Derek Harper and Del Harris on the same trip. Both were great. The criticism of Del Harris, who is a ridiculously nice man, is that he talks too much, right? That he just talked too much, that he would go on and on and on and on and on, and he wouldn't stop. And Chuck Daly would explain a defense in 30 seconds, and Del would take 27 minutes. And at the time, their point guard was Nicky Van Exel from Cincinnati, who's just a badass, and like would carve your face up with a knife if it meant, going through you. And it was a terrible marriage, those two, which is funny because now they're pretty good friends, but it was a terrible marriage. And I just think those guys, Van Exel, Eddie Jones, Kobe, certainly, Shaq, they just didn't want to sit there and listen to Del Harris talk nonstop. He knew just as much about basketball, if not more, than Phil Jackson, but they couldn't stand listening to him. So then they bring in Kurt Rambis as the interim coach, and Jerry West wants him to stay. Jerry West does not want to hire Phil Jackson. He wants Kurt Rambis, and Shaq cannot stomach Kurt Rambis as a head coach. He's babying Kobe. All he does is baby Kobe. And Kurt Rambis did. I love Kurt Rambis, but he did baby Kobe Bryant a lot. And the thing about Phil Jackson, so that was a Jerry Buss call. Shaq wanted him. Kobe wanted him. Jerry Buss wanted him. Jerry West did not want him at all. He shows up, and it sounds corny and simplistic, but it's not. Having those 6 rings he won with Jordan, having the 2 more rings he won with the Knicks, he just walked in with an authenticity that the other guys didn't have. And to Kobe, it's like, whoa, this is the guy who coached Jordan, my idol, who I want to be. And to Shaq, it was, Shaq had gone 4 years in Orlando, now another 3 without it. So 7 years now in without a championship. People are starting to say, is this the kind of player? Is this one of those guys like a Dominique Wilkins or like now like a Carmelo Anthony you can't win with? You're not going to win a championship with. And he desperately wanted Phil. And Jackson came with the authenticity that sort of was insanely important.
Well, so there's a parallel, crazily enough, in Chicago. Michael Jordan has 7 years. They're getting close. They keep losing to the bad boys. Jerry Krause, genius, love him or loathe him. The guy was an incredible architect, kept rebuilding that team, gets so much credit, even though we got a hard time from people for, making him the bad guy. We didn't make him the bad guy. We just told the facts, which is that he basically ended the run by telling Phil, even if you win 82 games, you're not coming back as the coach. Anyway, Doug Collins is right there on the brink. Looks like he can get him there. Jerry says, nope, we're bringing in Phil. In the case of the Lakers, similarly, like you said, with Shaq, what he did, though, which I would love to hear your take on, was bring in Jerry as his assistant. I'm sorry,
I mean, Kurt. Oh, yeah. It's an amazing personnel moment. It is one of the most overlooked basketball coaching personnel moves of the last, 30 years. Kurt Rambis expected to be named the head coach of the team. They hired Phil Jackson. Not only that, Phil Jackson was definitely vying for that job, whether he admits it or not, while those guys held the job. He was definitely dropping hints, I want this job.
Right.
So Del Harris made it clear to me he was not a fan of the way Phil Jackson handled it. I don't think Kurt Rambis was particularly happy with the way Phil Jackson handled it. So Kurt Rambis loses his job. Phil Jackson takes over. And then he asks Kurt Rambis if he wants to stay on as an assistant coach. It's unbelievable. And it says a lot about Phil Jackson and his security, but I think it actually says a lot more about Kurt Rambis because Phil Jackson was secure. He was a head coach. He could do with or without this guy. The fact that Kurt Rambis was willing to go from being a head coach to an assistant coach immediately kind of says a lot about his self-confidence. And he's actually one of my favorite. Over the years, all the crap Kurt Rambis has taken, he's not a good coach. Maybe he's not a good coach. But he's a generally decent guy and a really good person. And I always thought that showed a lot of security and confidence that he could do that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. And his wife is like Jeannie's best friend, right?
Linda.
Yeah. So Phil's now, he's got the 2 rings with the Knicks as a player and 6 with, he's got a pretty good pedigree. He comes here immediately, they're right there again. But I'm interested in the level to which he brought the mindfulness, the meditation, the alternative perspective to the Lakers. Because you hear it all the time, with the coffee can and MJ and all those guys buying into it. Was it prevalent? Was it less a part of his repertoire?
I feel like it was a little bit gimmicky. I don't know if you felt that way.
Not in Chicago. In fact, I bought into it way more than I expected from doing the research. And by the end of The Last Dance, I thought that guy is a flat out genius. Nobody else could have kept this team together.
I think he's a genius as a coach. I think he's one of the best personnel as far as understanding the mindset of your players. He was giving out books in LA, and generally this is what guys are doing with the books. All right, and never reading them, or he'd be, giving them, meditation. Like Shaq said, I was like, what'd you do during the meditation periods? He's like, yeah, I would sleep. Rick Fox, what would you do? Pretty much sleep, take a nap, think about what I had to buy later at this grocery store, stuff like that. But I think what he did really well, and this definitely in Chicago, but in LA, I thought it was masterful. Like in Chicago, you always had a pecking order. Jordan was the best guy. Pippen was never trying to be Jordan. Like Pippen never thought, I'm going to be better than Jordan. I'm going to topple Jordan and take over this team. Like that wasn't, he knew Jordan was a king. He was number 2. You would agree with that, no?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. He comes to LA and you basically have 2 guys who both think they should be the alpha. You really do. And what he did really well is he allowed the Rick Foxes and the Robert Ory's and the Horace Grants and the Derek Fishers and the Brian Shaws in a huge way to serve as sort of the voices of reason. And Phil Jackson did not come in that locker room every day, kind of like Dale Harris used to do, and say, you guys need to this or you guys need to that. You know, I really thought he first showed this genius with Dennis Rodman, where he just let Rodman, you show up, you know, you play hard, we're good. Everyone got that? Okay. Same here, like Shaq, Kobe, if you guys really want to go at each other, okay. There's this moment, I opened the book with the scene, 2002, Kobe and Samaki Walker get in a fight on the bus, on the team bus in Cleveland. And Samaki Walker, they are furious at each other. And Samaki Walker yells at Phil Jackson, Phil, stop the bus, stop the effing bus. And a lot of coaches would be like, I'm not stopping the bus. We're not having a fight on the side of the road in Cleveland. Phil Jackson goes, stop the bus. Bus stops. Samaki goes, Kobe, you getting off? Come on, Kobe, you coming? Let's go, let's go, let's go. And Kobe's like, nah, I'm good. And I think he knew that's how it would turn out, but he needed that resolution. And if he had jumped in and said, look, we're not stopping the bus. You guys need to act like adults, blah, blah, blah. He just didn't believe in being a babysitter. His job wasn't to be a babysitter. His job was to let these people figure it out as much as possible. And I just think in that regard, he was genius. And the other thing he did really well is obviously he brought the Tex Winter and the triangle offense from Chicago to LA. I always think people talk about Phil Jackson's ego and how big it is, and it was certainly big. He was never trying to take credit for the triangle. Like he let Tex Winter be the guy behind the triangle, and he always gave him credit nonstop. So it wasn't like he was trying to steal his thunder. I always thought that was kind of unique. A lot of guys would not have behaved that way, especially in that limelight.
It's so interesting that he had MJ and Kobe and had it get those guys to buy into the triangle, which is immediately taking stats off the board for those guys.
Yeah.
It's kind of Michael did. Kobe didn't seem to have that much of a trouble with the transition, did he?
It got worse with time, actually. Like when it first came along, the sort of mystique of Phil Jackson kind of compelled Kobe to listen. I think as the years went by, you know, Kobe got very frustrated by Shaq. He got frustrated by his lack of improvement on free throw shooting and his unwillingness to work on it. He would be in the gym every day in the offseason shooting whatever, 500 jumpers. Shaq would be in his mansion in Orlando eating a cheeseburger and floating in a pool, smoking a cigar. I'm not even saying Shaq is wrong in doing that because his body was decimated during the season. Stuff drove Kobe crazy. So I think as the years went on, Kobe had less patience for this idea that this is going to be a Shaq-centered offense and you're the B option. And I think by the end, you certainly saw by that 03-04 season, Kobe was pretty much done with it and wanted nothing to do with it.
All right, let's take this back to the first championship, first of the three-peat. So it's Shaq's 8th year or something, Kobe's 4th year. I'm going to give you a period of time and you play with it and craft the narrative as you see fit. There's that early February game when they beat Utah 113-67. 67, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the alley-oop in game 7 of the Western Conference Finals against Portland. Tell us how it went.
All right. So here's the thing I find fascinating about that. This is one of my favorite. That alley-oop is one of my favorite slivers of time ever because it is the frozen picture of the Kobe Shaq relationship. And the narrative is always the same thing, which is kind of a lazy journalistic narrative, but these things happen. It is, yeah, they didn't get along together off the court, but on the court, they came together and their games intertwined beautifully and blah, blah, blah. But I say bullshit 100%. Here's the thing. They always had 2 of the best 5 players in the NBA on the court. So you had Shaq and Kobe on the court. Their talents did not really mesh that well together. You know, like if you think about it, if you gave Shaq in his prime Steve Nash, that would be the perfect merging of center point guard. Even if you gave him a John Stockton, or I think even if you gave him a Scottie Pippen, who was a small forward handling the Kobe Bryant, what made that play so unique and so memorable is Kobe shoots that ball 99 out of 100 times. He's in the lane. Shaq is drifting toward the hoop. Usually Kobe shoots that. This time he didn't shoot that. And when you see Shaq running down, he's not pointing at Kobe. He's pointing toward the bench, like with this joyful look. And I just think the reason we actually remember that play, but we don't realize it, is because it so infrequently happened. And that moment was so freaking joyful and amazing because we almost never witnessed it. Those things never happen. Most of the time, how that play ends is Kobe drives down the lane. Shaq is drifting toward the hoop. Kobe ignores Shaq altogether. Kobe shoots the ball. if the ball goes in, Shaq's thinking, F this guy, that's bullshit. If it doesn't go in, let's say they call a timeout, they go to the side, Shaq is in Kobe's face saying, why the F didn't you pass the ball? Kobe's saying, maybe if your fat ass got closer to the rim, I would have. Yeah, well, you freaking know it, like, and it would be this like little thing. So I just think what made that play so magical is the uniqueness of it happening. There are not that many videos of Shaq and Kobe doing magical things together. Most of their plays are isolated plays where Kobe does something amazing, Shaq does something amazing.
Okay, but pulling back from the micro, which you described really well, the macro is stunning to think, having just gone through this 3-1 failure of the Clippers. The Lakers are up 3-1. The Trailblazers come back and even the series. And okay, so we'll get our shit together. We're obviously going to win Game 7. You chronicle all of the self-doubt. I mean, John Sally, who's one of my all-time favorites, these guys went into Game 7 kind of expecting to lose.
Yeah, and it's if you look at those two teams and you just go over the rosters, that Portland roster is preposterous. Like, it's so good and so deep. It's like a who's who of Bonzi Wells and Rasheed Wallace and Scottie Pippen and Detlef Schrempf and Arvydas Sabonis and Steve Smith. I mean, it's just a who's who. And there definitely was this moment where it's like, holy crap, we're about to blow this series. We're about to blow this series. And I just think the thing that I kept coming back to for me, and of course, Sally's playing minutes and he shouldn't be playing minutes because he's a shell of what he was. And the thing that came back to me, honestly, was Phil Jackson and the calmness of Phil Jackson. And there was a moment in a huddle where he was like, I guess you guys are done. I guess that's it. I guess this is over for you. You guys, clearly you don't want to win this. So we'll just have a great offseason. And he sold it in such a way that they actually believed he was being serious, where he's just like, I guess we're done. I've been in the NBA a long time. We're done. So that's okay. That's fine if that's and he just read that team really, really well, because there were a bunch of guys who are in baseball, as you know, they used to use the term red asses, which is guys who just got, and like Rick Fox was a red ass. Robert Horry was a red ass. Like, it got under their skins. And I think the other thing is like, Portland was they didn't have a go-to guy. They had a lot of guys who were in their careers had been number twos. Like Scottie Pippen was not used to taking a big shot. Detlef Schrempf, not really used to taking a big shot. Steve Smith, not used to taking a big shot. And in that game, if you look at it, it's crazy how many shots were missed by guys who have 5 All-Star games in their resume. Damon Stoudemire, guys like that, they just didn't want to take the big shot. And the Lakers had a lot of guys who were willing to miss big shots.
Can I use that as a springboard to one of my favorite characters? That I was going to ask you a question. How do you convince a Laker hater to buy this book and read this book? Bert will get mad at me if I don't try to, sell some books.
Sell, yeah.
The best book ever.
But I found it, and it's Brian Shaw.
Oh, I love Brian Shaw.
So tell Brian Shaw. I mean, for me, it's the guys. There's an old William Holden movie, Billy Wilder movie called Stalag 17, which I think is where Hogan's Heroes came from. And there's Gil Stratton, who became a sportscaster in LA. He was the boy in the barracks. He's the narrator. I always loved the boy in the back of the barracks who's seeing it all. This guy had one of the most tragic things anybody could ever imagine happening. And you talk about, like, what's the big deal if I miss a shot with 4 seconds left, right? After what happened.
Yeah. So his, it's one of the great tragedies, just as far as a player to hit a player. There's his sister, his mom, and his dad, and a niece. I'm trying to think, was a niece in the car too? But he basically,
that's who he ended up adopting.
Yeah. So they were all killed in a car accident, and this is when he was with Miami, and they all died. And so Brian Shaw basically lost 90% of his family in a single car accident on a single day. And he was, at the time, he was never a great NBA player, but he was always a very steady NBA player, and when that happened, something in that, first of all, he and his wife adopted his niece who lived. His sister died, the niece lived, adopted her, raised her as her own. There's a really good Real Sports they did on him years ago that's probably available on demand somewhere. And the thing that gave him, like, everyone has these moments in their lives that gives them something. Robert Horry also lost a daughter at a very young age. She died. She was born with a genetic disease and died. Guys like Shaw, guys like Horry, you just see it time and time again. When they have something really profoundly tragic happen to them, it sounds stupid, but it's actually true. They're just not afraid to miss a big shot. because they just have this perspective. If you're Kobe Bryant and your life has gone very smoothly, this is not a dig at Kobe Bryant. I'm just saying, if you're Kobe Bryant, age 22, and you've had this charmed life, you don't know the pain, the deep, 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 deep pain of losing someone really close to you. And I feel like when you have that pain, even if you don't think about it, it gives you a certain perspective that missing a shot in a big game isn't really a big deal. And if I miss it and I get booed and I'm the laughing stock in Lakers history, it doesn't matter. And it was actually Ori who has one of the great quotes of all time. It doesn't sound that great, but it is. Well, two great quotes actually. He said he was asked, like, why are you not afraid to take big shots? And he said, it sounds so simple. Right? He goes, if I make it, I make it. If I miss it, I miss it. Like, it just doesn't matter. It's not that big a deal. Either way, I'm going to wake up the next day. And then I love his quote after he hit the shot against Sacramento, the 3-pointer to beat Sacramento in the playoffs. Vlade Divac hit the ball, batted the ball back out to him, King center. And Vlade said after the game, someone said, why'd you do that? And he's like, I didn't think Ori could make that shot. And Vlade said, and Robert Ori said, I guess he doesn't read the newspapers because, Ori was like famous for hitting these shots.
Yes.
So,
More rings than anybody. Yeah, and also their presence in the locker room, their presence in the huddles. Brian Shaw was just a guy that you look at. He's on the bench. You feel somehow better about your chances. Like Steve Kerr played a little more of a prominent role with the Bulls. He made a couple of game-winning shots, but those guys you can't really measure by what's in the stat sheet, right? It's.
I thought you were going to ask me about J.R. Ryder, who's the opposite.
J.R. Ryder, and you had a little experience. I want to geek out on process a little bit, so that's a good place to start. Jeff, have you ever had an encounter on approaching somebody to do an interview with them and then not being that happy to see you?
Yeah, every once in a while. So J.R. Ryder was on the 2000-2001 Lakers, and I only had an address for him in Arizona. I did not have a phone number. And I was going to be in Arizona for a USFL book event. So I thought, I'm just going to knock on J.R. Ryder's door. So I get to his house. I got there really early. It was like 9:30 in the morning, which is unusually, I don't know what I was thinking. It's too early to knock on someone's door, but I was there. I knock on J.R. Ryder's door. J.R. Ryder was this notoriously moody, really from the tough part of Oakland. He was no wallflower. This guy was tough. Kind of threatened to beat up a few reporters in the past, blah, blah, blah. So I knock on his door, and a kid answers. This is like suburbia Phoenix, like middle nowhere Phoenix. And kid answers, and I'm like, hey, I'm Jeff. I'm looking for J.R. Ryder. It's like, hold on one second. Little kid. Woman comes to the door. I'm like, hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman, and I have my USFL book. I'm like, I'm a writer, and I wrote this book about the USFL, and I'm writing a book about the Lakers, and I'm really trying to find J.R. Ryder. She goes, hold on one second. She closes the door. And I hear behind the door, what the fuck? What? Who is it? What? I don't know. What? I don't know. What? Okay. The door opens. It's J.R. Ryder. He's not happy to see me. He goes, who are you? And I'm like, yeah, hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I'm a writer. I wrote this book about the USFL. And I'm doing a book about the Lakers. And I couldn't find your number. And I thought, bro, no. You just show up. You just have to show up. You just show up. You show up. And I'm like, well, no, man, no, bro, no, not cool. He opens the door, he comes out. Bro, I'm just saying that is not cool. You do not just walk up in a man's house. That is so, what's that book you have? And I go, oh, it's about the USFL. I wrote it. He's like, is that the Donald Trump League? I'm like, yeah. What are you working on? I'm doing a book about the Lakers, Shaq, Kobe, you were there. Man, those are good teams. I got some stories. All right, I'll talk to you. And then he's like, I don't have I can't talk now, but let me give you my phone number and you call me. And I told a few people this and they were like, he's never going to call you. Like, he's never going to call. He's J.R. Ryder. He does not call people back. I call him first time. He's like, hey man, how's it going? I'm like, great. 2 hours later, one of the best interviews for the book, J.R. Ryder.
Awesome. Persistence, man. Okay, how many interviews did you do for the book?
About 300.
300?
Yeah.
Wow. See, it's a lot easier when we don't have to have a camera crew running around. We did 106 people, but 108 interviews because we did Michael 3 times.
Yeah, that's crazy.
With the crew, and it's pretty expensive.
Different. I'm one guy on the phone. It's just me on a phone. It's a lot different.
What percentage would you say was on the phone versus in person?
Oh, it's probably 85% on the phone.
Okay.
And then,
So who was the worst? That he was the best. Who was the worst? Who was most disappointing?
well, Kobe wouldn't talk, and that was disappointing, and especially disappointing in hindsight. I was told he probably wouldn't talk early on. That number one, there's an Eagle Colorado thing hanging over this, which we can talk about if you want. But you know, I always say you're probably the same way. Like I don't blame someone for not talking. Like I can't pay you. You have no editorial control. You're not going to see the final project until it comes out. I'm never like, how dare you not talk to me? It's always disappointing. But there were a lot of guys. There were a good number of guys I didn't get. So that's why you keep calling and keep calling and keep calling. But like Ron Harper blew me off. Horace Grant blew me off. You got Horace Grant. I didn't get Horace Grant.
It took us like 8 tries to get Reggie Miller, right? Who you thought would have been one of the most eager, right?
Oh, it's a pain in the ass. Getting people is a pain. And when you say, I just think the more modern the players, the worse. Like I feel like modern players they've been coddled much more than the older players, and they're kind of used to this treatment.
You're right about Kobe. I probably shouldn't go to Eagle because I have a perspective, which I've already kind of, I've been transparent. But we're going to do, I'll let the audience, if they want to talk about that, because I guess I'm now going to go against what I just said. I'm stunned at the extent to which he became a Teflon man, and that just became forgotten history. And the level at which he was embraced, the outpouring of love and affection upon his death. I'm not a Los Angelino, I'm not a Laker fan, so I'm not invited to that party. I was heartened by it, but I was stunned by it. It's a testament, I guess, to our collective forgiveness and goodness. So, there's nothing bad about that. It's just, it's one of those things that it's the elephant in the room, right? But
I think it was one of them. I will say this. It really when I was a young reporter at the Nashville Tennessean, I was a very bad reporter, and my editor, Catherine Mayu, put me on cops so I would learn how to report. She's like, I want you to do cops. Invaluable, changed my career. And this was cops. This was deep digging. I went to Eagle. It was on the ground. I interviewed the DA on the case. I interviewed one of the lead detectives on the case. I interviewed the mayor of Eagle. I interviewed tons of people who covered the case. A few things I did find, it's from a reporting standpoint, it's fascinating, and like, I'm not as afraid as I was early on to talk about it, because I just think it sets a part of the story. Number one, the DA is convinced he was guilty. Number two, the lead detective was convinced he was guilty. That doesn't mean he was guilty, but they were convinced that he was guilty. The DA was devastated that the woman backed out of the suit. He also felt, at least implied strongly, that it was all sort of in a way set up, that she was, she talked about, they were going through this criminal case. He urged her not to do anything civil until the criminal case was done with, because if they came forth with a civil lawsuit as well, people would say, oh, she's just in it for the money, and it would taint any of the. So one day she hires a civil attorney, and he's like, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? And before long, she's back. She's calling him and saying, I don't want to do this case anymore. I don't want to do this case anymore. I don't want to go through with this. And she's saying it's because of how hard it was on her, and it was hard on her. But I think there's pretty good reason to believe that she just got a good enough financial settlement. Sure. That it was, and it's so understandable. Like the National Enquirer was camped outside of her house. Her name was everywhere. She was getting death threats from people. So I understand it, but the DA was devastated. He worked his butt off in that case, and he really thought he had a case.
Let me interrupt you guys, because we're coming into the last few minutes, and I
right.
want to give people a chance to ask a question. And since I own the bookstore, I thought I'd start with myself. So there are a couple of things that struck me, particularly knowing Mike was going to be here. Kobe Bryant was despised by lots of NBA players, according to your reporting, and Michael Jordan was despised by lots of NBA players. And each of them had this sort of golden reputation outside of that because of what they did on the court. How much did it weigh on Jordan, and how much did it weigh on Kobe that so many people hated him? And second piece, to go back, because I'm also a lawyer, you have some unbelievably detailed reporting on the Eagle, Colorado stuff. And I wondered how that influenced your view of Kobe Bryant sort of off the court.
I can't speak for Jordan. I'm sure Mike can. Kobe, 0%. Didn't care, didn't care, didn't care. Didn't care how he was perceived by others. Didn't care how he was perceived by other players. Didn't care. Was Jordan at all sensitive about that? Probably not.
Yeah, but I mean, there's that end of episode 7 where he almost breaks down and talks about the damage to his relationships and the price he paid for being so intense. But he stays above it. But we don't need to talk about that. This is your show.
I don't know.
I mean, it's Shaq is a guy. Speaking of Teflon, it was beloved by everybody, and yet there's this whole other thing about women that that Kobe was accusing him of, and I mean, that's really been buried, and somehow to see that in the book made me go, oh yeah. I mean, what's your take on that?
It's just the whole thing. I mean, it ties into both things here. Like if you just focus on the era I wrote about and the Kobe of that era, we're just talking about that, and you take into account Eagle, and what you're referring to is basically he kind of threw Shaq under the bus with the detectives and said, I don't understand what the big deal is. Shaq pays off women all the time. And Shaq found out that Kobe said that. And it was a major violation, and Shaq told me, he's like, I only told Kobe that to make him feel good, because he was devastated and going through this all, because I never paid off a woman. I don't know the truth of it, but that's what Shaq said.
Yeah.
It was hard to when you research Eagle, Colorado, you feel bad for Kobe because of the patheticness of it. Like, it's pathetic. It's actually pathetic. There's a Nas hip hop song called "These Are Our Heroes" where he just mocks Kobe Bryant over Eagle, Colorado, and he's like, "And you had sex with a hotel clerk," and it was a surgery that Kobe didn't tell the Lakers he was going to Eagle. He didn't tell them he was having the surgery. He hired his own physician to do it. He booked the hotel. He had sexual relations with the front desk clerk. Like, it was all his doing. And there's no more pathetic moment for Kobe Bryant, truly no more pathetic moment, than the detectives, having already interviewed the woman, drive up to the resort where he's staying. He's on crutches in the parking lot. They just find him in the parking lot on crutches. They think someone tipped him off and told him they were coming. And he doesn't have the wherewithal, like, for all his clutch on the court, doesn't have the wherewithal to tell the detectives, I need an attorney. I can't talk to you guys. I need an attorney here. And goes on this the interview is one of the most, it's available online. It's not that easy to find, but it's there. It is so painful and really pathetic about, my wife can't find this out. Whatever happens. And, first he says, I didn't have sex with her, and then he did. So I think what I walked away from that to answer the question a long way, is in a sense, like, disgust for him at that moment, and weird pangs of sympathy for how pathetic that moment was. And I really need to step back and see who he became later on and think, well, maybe he changed. And as he got older, he kind of matured, and hopefully he got far enough away from that he was a different person. I don't know.
Kelsey, looks like there are some questions in the chat. Can you read them and see if there are other hand raisers who'd like to ask a question of Jeff?
Absolutely. So we've got 2 from Miran, whose first question is, what is the most surprising thing you learned about Kobe? And the second is, how many drafts of the book did you write and rewrite?
First of all, Miran is a friend of mine, Miran Fader of Bleacher Report, really good writer. And I think the thing about Kobe that I found just crazy is the Nets were going to pick him at number 8. 96 draft, the Nets are sold on Kobe Bryant, and they're going to take him. They have a young first-year coach named John Calipari, who some of you may have heard of since. And Cal is in his 30s. And one of the things, they paid a ton of money to get him from UMass. And in his contract, he has final personnel say. So they have a really good general manager named John Nash. But John Calipari is their head coach, and he has final personnel say. So the day before the draft, they're committed. If Kobe Bryant's there at number 8, we're taking Kobe. And Kobe calls. Kobe has a deal worked out with Adidas. He has a shoe deal, and Adidas wants him in LA. Jerry West had worked him out in LA. Jerry West wants him badly in LA. His agent wants him in LA. The day before the draft, Kobe calls John Calipari and says, "Hey, coach, it's Kobe Bryant. I know you guys are thinking of taking me. I think I want to get away from my family. So if you could not draft me, that'd be great." Calipari's freaking out. "Oh my God, what the hell?" Kobe's agent calls John Calipari. "Hey, Cal, Kobe, he's not going to sign with you guys if you draft him. He's going to go to Italy, play for a year, and then re-enter the draft. You don't want to draft him." Holy cow. He runs into John Nash's office to GM. "What are we going to do?" John Nash is like, "Cal, they're just bluffing. It's all BS." Kerry Kittle's of Villanova. His agent is David Falk. Kerry Kittle desperately wants to play for the Nets, local team. David Falk calls Calipari, says, "Listen, Kerry Kittle's, if he's there at number 8, you better take him, or I am not bringing other free agents your way." Holy cow. He goes to John Nash's office. "What are we going to do? This is crazy." John Nash is like, "Cal, we have a plan. We're taking Kobe." Okay, we're taking Kobe. The next morning, they report for the draft. Calipari holds a team meeting, and he's like, "I've been thinking about it. Here's what we're going to do. Kerry Kittles is available at number 8. We're taking Kerry Kittles. If not, we're drafting Kobe Bryant." Of course, the draft comes. Kerry Kittle's on the board at number 8. The Nets grab him. Jerry West knows the next 4 teams what they're going to do because Charlotte has a pick. They have a trade already prearranged with LA if Kobe's on the board. Jerry West knows the 4 next teams haven't even worked out Kobe. Kobe's on the board. Charlotte takes him, trades him to LA. Jerry West walks into Jerry Buss, the owner's office, and says, "I just got you the best player in this draft." And that was Kobe Bryant. I love that story, and I love that John Calipari is the reason Kobe Bryant became a Laker.
Great.
It's very funny.
Next question.
Yes, so this one is actually for Mike and Jeff, from Jared, who's always been interested in how interviewers manage to get people to share their stories. Do either of you have a go-to strategy when you're interviewing someone to get them to reveal the real juicy details you're looking for?
What do you got, Mike?
Well, you got to read the playing field, right? You got to come to the line of scrimmage and survey it and often call an audible. I think it's really great to have some little known stories that you have in your hip pocket to just soften them up, make them A, know you've done your research so you're credible, and B, make it start to feel personal. Kind of, save the hard stuff for later. But on the other hand, make sure the hard stuff doesn't get buried too long to where they've lost their steam and they're not going to be as sharp. Michael was Michael. Michael treated the interview like he treated, a championship game. He came to play the first interview went 3.5 hours. We had to stop because we wanted to save the material for the next one. But I think it's like establish credibility and show some personal rapport, and you're halfway home.
The other thing I would say that I agree with everything you just said, is a lot of times you get something little from one guy, and that little thing is just like a seed in a plant. Like I remember when I wrote a book about the 90s Cowboys called Boys Will Be Boys. This is a little crass, but they had a player named Charles Haley, who was a defensive lineman. And Charles Haley used to pleasure himself in front of the team, which is super weird. But I didn't know anything about Charles Haley. And one day I'm talking to a defensive back named Scott Case, who was only with the Cowboys for 1 year. And he goes to me, I'll tell you a story. He said, one day I'm in a meeting and Charles Haley is like, hey, Scott, turn around. And it's a meeting. Jimmy Johnson's running the meeting. Hey, Scott, turn around. And Scott Case is like, no, Charles, be quiet. Scott, turn around. I got to show you something. Nah, I can't, be quiet. Scott, turn around. I got to show you something. It's important. And he turns around and Charles Haley has his extended on his desk. Okay. And that was my first inkling of how off balance Charles Haley was. So now I have this information, and everyone I would talk to, I'd be like, so I talked to Russell Maryland, and I'll be like, so I was talking to Scott Case. He told me a story about Charles Haley and his penis on the desk. Oh, he told you that story. Let me tell you, I got a story for you about that. I'm like, one little story, oftentimes, one little thing makes it just grow and flower. And someone might just give you a little tiny nook, and it goes very far.
So Jason had this little tidbit. In 1984, Michael Jordan's rookie season, the Bulls were bad. And he had this little nugget that a reporter called them the flying cocaine circus. And he said that out loud, and Michael started howling. never heard that before. He's slapping his knee. And all of a sudden, instead of just saying, "Ah, yeah, that's funny," go on to the next,
Right.
he went, "Yeah, well, I opened that door and there are the women and there's the weed and there's the lines." And it like, all of a sudden we looked at each other and we said, this is going to be good. He's in.
Because
All
if
the
you
way-
show the person you're interviewing that you know something that they would be surprised that you know, it almost gives you an equal footing that maybe you didn't have before.
Right.
You know, it's almost like, oh, you really do know your stuff, and that really matters. Yeah, I agree.
Kelsey, more?
Yes, we've got time for 2 more questions and then we'll call it a night. So the first of those questions is from David, who says, first off, thank you for doing this, as we all agree. But the question is a hypothetical. If you had the chance to speak with Kobe, even for just a few minutes, what would be the top 1 or 2 questions you would have asked him for this book?
I mean, I'd have to have talked to him about Eagle because it just hangs over this book in a huge way. So I would. The other thing that I feel like I don't understand about him, like when you write these books, everyone thinks you come away with a PhD knowledge of a subject, and you like to think you do too, but it's a little bit fictitious. I still don't fully understand where that whole "I will slit your throat to beat you in a basketball game" comes from. Like everyone's like, "Oh, well, he was raised in Italy," or "Oh, he had a dad for an NBA player." Well, his dad wasn't that way. Jelly Bean wasn't that way at all. And there are a lot of people who were raised in a different country, and they don't like. I don't fully understand that about him. Like how you become this guy who you just you have this one single thing, and it's the only thing that you are super hyper charged up about, and it's basketball, and that's it. And I would love to understand in much, much, much greater detail than I do where that comes from, because I feel
You
like
don't think from modeling himself after Michael?
yeah, but how does that? What I'm saying is, like, you watch Jordan play basketball. There are kids all over the world who watch Jordan play basketball and want to be Michael Jordan, but there's something inside him that like took it to a level that no one else gets to. So what is that? Like, how do you get there where you're so single-mindedly focused at age 12? And when he signed up for a summer camp, and I think he was 13, and it was career goal NBA. Like, and he knew it. Like, he actually knew it. He was going to play in the NBA, and he knew he was going to be Jordan. I'm just kind of mesmerized by that level of self-assuredness and this forward thinking that you know it's going to happen, you know? So.
Kelsey, last question.
Our last question is coming from Paul, who asks, if the Lakers had defeated Detroit in the 2004 finals, do you think that Shaq would have stayed and the 2 of them would have tried to make it work?
Oh, that's such a good question. And that 2003-2004 season is the craziest season ever any team has gone through in NBA history pre-playing in the bubble. In that year alone, the Lakers added Karl Malone and Gary Payton, so they had a quote-unquote dream team. Phil Jackson didn't know if he was coming back or going. He just had no idea. Shaq reports overweight, and he's furious that the Lakers won't extend his contract. Kobe is flying back and forth to Eagle, Colorado for the sexual assault situation. He has 1 foot out the door that he's going to go to the Clippers. He's mad at the Lakers. He thinks they're not showing him respect, blah, 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 blah. The whole season is a disaster. No one's happy. They're all angry at each other. They lose to Detroit in 5 games. And after game 5, they have a little team function. Jerry Buss throws a team function at the team hotel at a restaurant. It's closed just to the Lakers. Kareem Rush, Kobe's backup, is at this thing, and Kobe walks in. And Kareem Rush is under the impression that this was a very successful year. We made the NBA Finals. It was great, blah, blah, blah. This is great. I'll come back next year. We're going to be good. Kobe walks in. He walks up to Kareem Rush, and he says, "I will never play with that mother effer again." And then a couple of minutes later, Jerry Buss walks in, owner of the Lakers. And Shaq is there with his wife, and Kobe is there. And Jerry Buss walks right past Shaq, doesn't say a word to him, and goes straight up to Kobe. And Shaq said he knew at that moment that he was done as a Laker. There was no chance Kobe Bryant would come back to the Lakers if Shaq was there. Like, none. He was gone to the Clippers. The Lakers had a serious choice to make, which is we either bring back Shaq and possibly Phil, or we bring back Kobe and not the other 2. And I think they made what was the wise choice. You know, because the idea of Kobe Bryant in a Clipper uniform for the next 10 years playing in the Staples Center, Mike might have been happy, but it would have been too much for them to bear.
It's a nice dream.
Yeah.
So let me bring this to an unfortunately early end. I see we have a bunch of questions still, and I apologize. Had we been at Chevalier's Books, the oldest bookstore in Los Angeles, 80 years, we would now be having wine and cheese, but unfortunately, we've been visited with this plague, and this can't go on informally. So I apologize for that. But I want to thank Mike and Jeff, and let me just pitch the book one more time. Really, really worth reading, filled with fun, interesting stories, teaches you a lot about what it is to become the greatest person at something in the world and what it's like to try to run an organization and be part of an organization and something that's greater than yourself. So tonight, I have to say, we feel greater than ourselves because of Mike and Jeff. I appreciate very much everybody being here. Thanks so much. And buy his book. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
All right.
Bye, guys.